March 24th, 1945, the war was supposed to be ending. But up here, 22,000 feet above Germany, it didn't feel that way. It felt endless, cold, mechanical, a machine still killing even as its heart stopped beating. Lieutenant Eric Stahl sat in the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109, his gloved hand trembling against the throttle. The engine rattled beneath him like a dying beast. The needles on his instruments quivered in protest. The fuel gauge was pinned to empty. He tapped it once. Nothing. The oxygen hissed through his cracked mask. Each breath was shallow, metallic, tasting faintly of frost and oil. The world below was a blur of grey and ruin, broken villages, burned roads, and rivers that reflected only smoke. Eric leaned forward, squinting through the frost-coated glass. The engine coughed once more. Then it died. The propeller slowed until it was just a spinning shadow. The sound of it fading was almost worse than the noise itself. Now there was only wind, sharp, merciless wind, and the creaking of the wings as the Messerschmitt turned from predator to corpse. He was gliding. No power, no thrust, only gravity and silence. He looked down. 50 miles of enemy-held territory stretched beneath him. Allied tanks crawled through the valleys like metal insects. Trucks moved along the roads. Artillery flashes bloomed like silent lightning. Behind him lay nothing but sky, and home too far to reach. He knew what capture meant. They all did. Every German pilot had heard the stories. The Americans didn't just shoot you down, they hunted you. They circled your parachute. They waited for you to land. Then they made sure you never stood again. He had believed it. Everyone had. It was easier that way. To believe your enemy was less than human. It made pulling the trigger simpler. The Messerschmitt rattled as cold air clawed through its frame. Eric's breath fogged the canopy. He pressed 2 fingers to the photograph clipped beside the altimeter. A woman smiling faintly, a younger sister clinging to her arm. His mother and Greta, Bavaria, summer fields, the kind of colors he hadn't seen in years. If he died here, they'd never know how. Just a telegram, a word, vermisst, missing, nothing more. He swallowed hard, pushing the thought away. There was still sky beneath him, still a chance. Maybe he could glide far enough, find a clearing, put the machine down before it broke apart. He tilted the nose gently, coaxing the dead aircraft into a shallow descent. The air howled past the canopy like ghosts. Then something caught his eye, 2 faint glints behind him, high in the light haze of the upper clouds. At first, he thought they were reflections. Then they moved. Fast. He blinked, his pulse jumped. P-51 Mustangs, silver and sleek. American. 2 of them. He had seen them before, the way they cut through formations like razors through paper. The way they danced in the air, mocking the lumbering bombers and slower fighters. They were death with wings. He felt it before he saw it, the instinct, the certainty that he'd been found. He didn't bother reaching for the trigger. His guns were dry, his heart wasn't. He closed his eyes and waited for the rattle of bullets, for the sky to tear open and swallow him whole. But nothing came. He opened his eyes again. One of the Mustangs was now beside him, not in the distance, beside him. Barely 50 feet away, riding the same current of wind, matching his descent perfectly. Eric's breath caught. He turned his head slowly. Through the glass canopy, he saw the pilot. Young, calm. Eyes hidden behind goggles, jaw tight, hand steady on the stick. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, 2 men suspended in the same dying sky. The American didn't fire. He didn't even touch the trigger. He lifted one hand and pointed down. Eric frowned, confused. Was it mockery? A gesture before the kill? He looked again. The movement wasn't taunting. It was controlled, almost deliberate. Then a second Mustang appeared on the other side. Both of them now, one on each wing, flying so close their wingtips seemed to shimmer in the same breath of air. Eric's stomach twisted. He was boxed in, trapped. But they weren't shooting. The first pilot gestured again, downward, towards something below the mist. Eric followed the movement with his eyes. There, barely visible through the thin clouds, was a stretch of land. A captured German airstrip, now held by the Americans. He could see faint movement, trucks, tents, runway markings. It couldn't be. Land. There. The Mustangs were signaling again. Down! Go down! He shook his head, disbelief turning to panic. They were insane. If he landed there, they'd kill him the moment he touched the ground. The lead Mustang rocked its wings, once, sharply, then pointed again. Down. The Messerschmitt shuddered as Eric guided it lower. He didn't know why he was listening. Maybe because there was no other choice. Maybe because a part of him still wanted to believe there was something left of humanity up here. 10,000 feet. The world below grew clearer. The airfield loomed larger. He could see American ground crews running between planes, oblivious to what was happening above them. The Mustang stayed with him, unwavering, 5,000 feet. His gloves were soaked with sweat. The stick slipped in his grip. His heart pounded so hard it echoed in his helmet. Still, they didn't fire. 3,000. Then the lead Mustang rocked its wings one last time, a pilot's goodbye, and peeled away into the clouds. The second followed seconds later, leaving Eric alone in the wind. He watched them disappear, small silver ghosts fading into the mist. He lowered the landing gear manually, praying the crank still worked. The levers groaned, complaining but obeyed. He gritted his teeth, eyes fixed on the runway. The ground rushed toward him. He hit hard. The aircraft bounced, the landing gear screaming as metal scraped concrete. Then it slammed down again, sparks flying, sliding nearly 100 meters before lurching to a stop at the far end of the runway. Silence, no flames, no shouts, just the faint hiss of steam from the shattered engine. Eric sat there, frozen, his gloved hand still clamped on the stick. His breathing came ragged, his vision blurred with shock. He'd landed. He was alive. And he had no idea why. Movement flickered at the edge of the canopy. Jeeps, 3 of them, racing down the tarmac, dust swirling behind. Soldiers standing in the backs, rifles raised. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. The closer they came, the louder the sound grew. Engines, tires, shouts. This was it. Capture. Humiliation. Maybe death. He reached for his pistol, the one strapped to his thigh. His hand hovered over it. Then he stopped. He saw again the Mustang pilot's face in his mind. The calm, the unspoken mercy. He lowered his hand. Slowly he raised both arms, fingers spread. The canopy creaked open, spilling in the cold air. He climbed out, boots hitting the concrete. The wind carried the faint smell of fuel and smoke. The first jeep skidded to a halt in front of him. Soldiers jumped down, weapons leveled. "Hands up," one shouted. Eric didn't speak. He just lifted his arms higher. The man approached, young, maybe 20. His rifle steady, but his expression not cruel, just cautious. "You all right?" the American asked, his accent clipped by tension. Eric blinked. "Nicht verletzt," he said softly. "Not hurt." The soldier nodded. "Good." He lowered the rifle slightly, motioning toward the jeep. "Come on." Eric hesitated, then obeyed. As he climbed in, another soldier handed him a canteen. "Drink," he said simply. Eric took it. The water was icy, clean, impossibly pure. He swallowed and whispered, "Danke." The soldier smiled faintly. "You're welcome, pal." The jeep jolted forward. The wind whipped against Eric's face as they drove past rows of American aircraft. Men were laughing, working, living. It felt surreal. He looked back once, at the broken Messerschmitt on the runway. The engine still smoked gently, like a dying fire refusing to go out. He should have been dead. Instead, he was being driven toward warmth. And he didn't know why. The jeep rattled across the cracked runway, its tires splashing through shallow puddles of melted frost. Eric sat between 2 American soldiers. The one on his right was young, his face pink from the cold. The other chewed gum with quiet rhythm, eyes fixed ahead. Neither of them spoke. Eric's breath clouded in the air. He could still smell the smoke of his dying aircraft behind him, that scent of burned oil and carbon that every pilot knew. He should have hated the men sitting next to him. That's what he'd been taught. But hate felt small now, meaningless against the scale of what had just happened. The jeep stopped outside a low wooden building. Warm light spilled from the windows. The driver climbed out first. "This way," he said simply. Inside, the air hit like a wave, warm, dry, carrying the smell of coffee and paper. It was quiet, except for the hum of a radio somewhere in another room. A man waited behind a desk, an officer, late 40s maybe, with neat hair and a thin scar beneath his eye. His uniform was clean, but his face carried the exhaustion of too many years in war. "You must be the pilot," he said in careful German. "Lieutenant Eric Stahl, correct?" Eric hesitated, then nodded. "Ja." "Captain James Mitchell," the man said, extending a hand. Eric didn't move at first, then slowly reached out and shook it. The American's grip was firm, steady, human. Mitchell gestured toward a chair. "Sit, please." Eric sat. His legs still trembled. On the desk in front of him sat 2 cups, steam rising from them. Coffee. The smell alone was almost painful, rich, nostalgic, too familiar. Mitchell poured one and pushed it toward him. "You've had a long day," the captain said. "Drink. No tricks." Eric lifted the cup, hands shaking. The first sip burned his tongue. He didn't care. It was warmth. It was life. Mitchell leaned back. "You met 2 of our pilots today, Captain Miller and Lieutenant Hayes. They saw your engine cut out. Could have taken you down easy, but they didn't." Eric looked up slowly. "Why?" His voice cracked. "Why not finish it?" Mitchell's reply came without hesitation. "Because you were defenseless, and because this war has taken enough from all of us." For a long time, neither man spoke. The radio in the next room played faint music, a slow swing tune crackling under static. Finally, Mitchell stood. "You'll be transferred to the holding barracks. You'll be treated fairly. You'll get food, water, medical attention. You're a soldier, not a prisoner to be abused. Remember that." He paused, studying Eric's face. "You fought hard, just for the wrong side." Eric wanted to respond, but the words never formed. 2 guards escorted him out, back into the cold night. The stars were sharp and cruel above them, the same stars he'd flown under for years. The barracks weren't what he expected, not cages, not pits. A long wooden hall heated by stoves, filled with bunks. Men were talking softly, eating from tins. Some laughed, German, his language. He stood in the doorway, frozen. One of the guards nudged him gently. "Go on, find a bed." He stepped inside. 12 other airmen looked up, all in grey uniforms, all thin and hollow-eyed. They stared for a moment, then nodded, wordlessly acknowledging another survivor of the sky. He found a cot in the corner and sat down. The blanket was rough, but it was warm. A medic arrived shortly after, checking his hands. Frostbite, minor burns. He dabbed cream gently, wrapped the fingers in gauze. "You'll be fine," the medic said, his accent thick but kind. That night Eric lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. The sound of breathing filled the room, human, steady, alive. He couldn't stop thinking about the Mustang pilot. That look through the glass. No hate, no triumph, just understanding. For the first time since the war began, Eric felt something new. Not fear, not anger, confusion. Why show mercy when every rule said not to? Why save an enemy when it was easier to kill him? When sleep finally came, it brought dreams of open skies, and the ghost of a silver plane flying beside him in the light. Morning came quietly, the smell of coffee again, the hiss of the stove, the faint hum of a generator somewhere outside. A young American guard, freckles across his face, approached with a tin tray. "Breakfast," he said. Eric blinked down at the food, eggs, bread, even a small piece of chocolate. He hadn't tasted chocolate in years. The sweetness made his chest tighten. The guard noticed his hesitation. "It's okay," he said. "You can eat. War's over for you." "Over," Eric repeated softly. The word felt foreign in his mouth. Later that day, the guard returned. He carried a record player, old, scuffed, humming faintly when the needle dropped. Music filled the barracks, Benny Goodman, the kind Eric had listened to before the war. The other German pilots smiled weakly. One started tapping the bunk with his foot. Someone hummed along. The guard laughed. Guess music sounds the same in any language. Eric found himself smiling, a small, uncertain curve of the lips, but real. For a moment, the war outside vanished. The world shrank to sound and light, to warmth and memory. He realized something then. The Americans weren't showing mercy because they were weak. They were doing it because they were strong enough not to hate. That thought stayed with him long after the music stopped. Part 3. The Sky Forgives. 2 weeks passed before he saw the pilot again. It was late afternoon. The camp was quiet except for the distant thrum of engines. Eric sat outside on a bench, staring at the horizon. The light was fading to gold, the kind of soft glow that made even barbed wire look beautiful. A jeep rolled up, stopping just short of the gate. The driver climbed out, young, confident, his uniform bearing the faded insignia of the 357th Fighter Group. Captain James Miller, the man from the sky. He was older than Eric had imagined up close. Lines around his eyes, a scar on his chin, but the same calm gaze, steady, almost gentle. "Afternoon, Lieutenant," he said, switching briefly into German. "Mind if I sit?" Eric shook his head, still stunned. Miller sat beside him. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them carried only the quiet creak of metal and the soft rustle of wind. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Eric said finally. Miller smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd want to. I thought you'd kill me." "I almost did," Miller admitted. "But then I saw your propeller stopped. You weren't fighting anymore. You were just falling." He looked out over the field. And something in me said, "Enough killing for one lifetime." Eric's eyes burned. "You risked your life for an enemy." Miller shrugged. "I risked it for a pilot. I've been in that seat, watching the sky disappear. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small photograph. A woman holding 2 children. "My wife, Helen. Boys are 5 and 3. I wanted to go home to them. Figured maybe you had someone waiting too." Eric nodded slowly. "My mother. My sister." Miller smiled softly. "Then we had the same reason." They sat in silence again, the kind that says everything words can't. When Miller stood to leave, he extended his hand. "You fly well, Lieutenant. That landing, hell, even some of our boys couldn't pull that off." Eric took his hand, the same gesture he'd shared with Captain Mitchell. But this one felt heavier, sacred somehow. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For everything." Miller shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just remember it." He walked away, boots crunching on gravel, the setting sun painting his shadow long across the ground. Months passed, the war ended, the camps emptied. Eric was sent home to Bavaria, a home that barely existed anymore. The town was rubble. The church he'd grown up beside was gone, but his mother and sister were alive. That was enough. He rebuilt slowly, became a pilot again, this time for peace, flying mail routes, cargo, eventually commercial flights. Every time he took off, he remembered that day in the sky when death came beside him and chose not to pull the trigger. Decades later, in a small apartment overlooking the Rhine, he wrote a letter to America, to the Veterans Office of the 357th Fighter Group. It was short. "To the pilot who spared me above Germany. You showed me mercy when the world had forgotten what that word meant. If you are still alive, know that your kindness changed me. I owe you my life." Months passed before a reply came. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. "I remember you. That day I saw a man, not a monster. Maybe that's what saved us both." James Miller. They met in 1989, 2 old men, once enemies, standing face to face in an airport terminal. Miller wore a faded jacket with pilot wings. Eric's hands trembled as he reached out. "You gave me my life," he whispered. Miller smiled. It was the right thing to do. They hugged, firm, long, wordless. The cameras that captured that moment didn't need to explain what it meant. Because some stories aren't about sides or victories, they're about survival and the fragile miracle of mercy in a world that had forgotten how to show it. Eric lived another 20 years. When he died, his grandson carried his photo into the cockpit of a NATO jet. flying beside Americans, allies now, not enemies. A new generation soaring under the same sky, living proof of what one man's restraint can build. And somewhere in that great empty sky, if you listen closely, maybe you can still hear it. Two engines, side by side, gliding through silence. Not to kill, but to understand, because sometimes the truest victories in war aren't won by bullets. They're won by mercy.